You know, we do a lot of theoretical things. Well, now it's happened. The Supreme Court has just had another case deadlocked at 4-4, the second one since Antonin Scalia died, leaving just 8 justices. And more decisions could be along the way. That is one of the reasons the White House wants to get its nominee considered by Republicans who are hell-bent on blocking it. And now it's mapping out a roadmap to get that done. Next month, it is going to have Merrick Garland meet with as many senators as possible, including Republicans. Then in May, the administration will launch a blitz calling on the GOP to hold hearings. Well, my next guest just wrote an article about the reality and the ramifications of a divided court with just 8 members. Robert Barnes is the Washington Post Supreme Court reporter. For anyone who wondered what a split court would look like, let alone result in, we got our answer yesterday. It's a harbinger potentially of things to come, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, the court now has 8 members. It's ideologically split. It's pretty evenly divided between the court's liberals and conservatives. And we saw yesterday in a couple of actions that the court took just what that looks like.
And we saw that certainly with the mandate as related to union dues, but also an element of the Affordable Care Act as well. And you saw Justice Kennedy trying to, in effect, kind of broker a compromise between the two. Potentially that could be a new normal as well, right?
Yeah, it was a very unusual order that came from the court. As you probably know, the court had a hearing last week on this mandate that's in the Affordable Care Act. It says that employers who provide their employees with health insurance must cover contraceptive care for female employees. And a number of groups, religiously affiliated groups such as charities, hospitals, universities, have said that they don't want to do that, that it violates their religious beliefs. And so those cases are now at the Supreme Court. The Obama administration has offered what it says is an accommodation, that all they have to do is sign a form that says they object, and these employees will get the contraceptives through another means. But they say that even signing that form makes them complicit in providing this coverage that they say is against their religion. And so the court seemed very evenly divided last week at the end of oral arguments. What happened yesterday was the court put out an order saying, we'd like additional briefing from all of you parties in this, and here's a compromise that maybe would work. Basically, it would sort of free these organizations from signing a form. But it's very unusual for the court to be so specific in trying to work out a compromise.
Almost like they're crafting policy. To that end, Robert, lest anyone at home say, oh, well, now 4-4 always results, the tie goes to the left, if you will. Not always the case, as you wrote about. There's an element as it related to deportation of illegal immigrants that if it got punted back to the lower court, a lot of those folks, to the dismay of the administration, would not be shielded from deportation, right?
That's right. When the court splits 4-4, the court is always considering a case that came to it from a lower court. And in the case of a 4-4 tie, it means that whatever the lower court decided stands, that decision, but it only affects that region of the country that the lower court covers. So it doesn't set a national precedent. Some of the cases that the court is considering, those lower courts came to a conservative ruling. For instance, as you say, President Obama's plan that would shield millions of undocumented immigrants from deportation. In that case, if the court splits 4-4 and it upholds the lower court decision, then that means that the program would not go into effect while the president is still in office.
Robert, talk about Merrick Garland a little bit. I mean, folks, at least our audience, we've made them familiar with his bio. He's known as an accomplished jurist, one that has had his fans on both sides of the aisle. But historically, if you will, is he a candidate that normally, given history, would have sailed through with, if not, zero opposition, minimal? Is it very uncommon that somebody, given his ideological bent here, would have any troubles getting confirmation, let alone a hearing or a vote?
Yeah, well, I don't think that any Supreme Court nominee sails through anymore. I think that those are bygone times. The court has become very politicized on both sides. But as you say, he is what would be considered a compromise candidate in most cases. Republicans in the past have said that he would make for a good Supreme Court nominee. And some liberals are not completely happy with his choice by the president because they say they would like someone more liberal on the court. So in a way, he does have all those sort of characteristics of a compromise candidate, but there doesn't seem to really be such a thing these days, at least until the election.
We'll speak to that point, Robert, in both of what you're hearing on the ground now, but also beyond even this election in November. Some of the difficult realities about getting Supreme Court justices confirmed, and even using Justice Roberts' threshold, where he says if you're a qualified, competent jurist here, that should be the threshold, not the rest. Let's first start with present day. We know Republicans that are up for re-election in the Senate, especially in toss-up states or even blue-leaning states, they've got a tough political dynamic to meet here. Is it your sense that Grassley's going to hold the line along with McConnell and there will be no hearings? There might be some meetings one-on-one, but there won't be hearings, let alone a vote before the election?
I have to say I'd be surprised if there was a hearing. If there is a hearing, it's because the ground has really shifted in some way. Republicans on the ground and Republicans now in their primaries very much don't want hearings. They don't want the president to get another Supreme Court nominee on the bench. And so Republicans who are in primary fights and are dealing with that right now know that they're on solid ground with their constituents. But it could change in the general election depending on how things shake out. Right now, it doesn't look like it, and you know, if Mitch McConnell knows anything, it's that he knows how to run the Senate, and he knows when he's on firm ground or not.
So, you know, somebody said to me, Robert, you know, Republicans may want to take this deal because after November, and again, it's so dangerous to extrapolate anything given this political season, but let's say the Democrats, who seem to be the prohibitive favorite, they do take the White House. But let's also say they don't get the magic number of 60 they'd need in the Senate. To that point, are we just going to have this protracted fight that it doesn't get resolved in the beginning of the 2017 calendar year? We're just going to have an ongoing fight, if not in perpetuity. This thing could drag on 6 months, another year here before we get a justice that actually gets an up and down confirmation. Why should people feel that this is just a problem between now and November? This isn't the new normal.
I think certainly we've entered a new phase in which it's no longer automatic that a president's nominee is going to be confirmed to the court. And I think that there are some trimming of sails and some finding a compromise candidate to make that work. As you say, the Chief Justice has complained about that. He says that Justice Alito, nominated by a Republican president, and Justices Sotomayor and Kagan, appointed by Democrats, he says all three were highly qualified, and they were all pretty much confirmed on party line votes. He says that the problem with that is it makes it look like that the justice emerges from this as sort of the favorite of one party over the other, and that politicizes the court even more.
Well, it certainly will be a fascinating next calendar year. Robert, as always, I really appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Why isn't anybody?
All right, guys. The politics of the Supreme Court have always been, this is not, I think people get Pollyannish, like, oh, in the good old days, they just would hug it out and find out. No, it always is bruising. Ask Robert Bork, all right? And there's been others. However, I just have this sinking suspicion that even whatever happens in November with the election, that this fever is not going to break, and that it's going to be on party lines just like everything else is in Washington. And this idea of we're held up for one justice, and I don't want to be proven wrong, you have a lot of justices that have been looking forward to retiring or that are in failing health. This is not going to be the first and last time we're going to have to deal with this, I think, in the next few years. I'm really worried that accomplished jurists won't be able to get on the bench if they don't meet, you know, if one party doesn't like their politics.
Well, there's no doubt about that, but let's just think about what's going to go on now for the next 12 to 18 months and the extent to which politics has interfered with the way we live. So these politicians are playing their game, and they're holding up the nomination, they're holding up hearings, so that for the next 12 to 15 months, you're going to have how many ties with the cases going back to the districts, with the districts being divided throughout the country. So as your guest said before, if you live in one district, you're going to be deported. If you live in another district, you're not going to be deported. If you live in one district, you can get mandated insurance for contraceptives, where if you live in a... People are going to start realizing that their elected politicians don't care about them.
Do you think so? And I ask that because I find it outrageous. I'm sure you guys, when you have lunch with other attorneys, say this is crazy, right? Does the general public care what happens at the Supreme Court? And I've given up trying to read this in this election season. Do you think it matters? Because the polls say they think it's nuts. They say, wait a minute. Article 5 of the Constitution says president's allowed to appoint somebody. Now, they got to confirm it, but you at least got to give the guy a hearing. And people think they're cheating.
Well, I think the general public isn't aware of it, but I think they will be, because this same process that you're looking at, it happens for the appellate courts, the federal appellate courts, and also the district courts. This goes up and down the line. So eventually, if there's a situation where they can't appoint somebody and the person can't get confirmed, you're going to have a situation eventually where there'll be trial courts, less trial courts. There'll be less appellate courts to hear
Isn't, to a
cases.
certain degree, Doug, that already happening, where there's such a backlog of justices on the lower courts here that haven't been able to get confirmed? That it's not just the Supreme Court. This has gone up and down the pike, that people are saying, we're having a real problem here because we can't get justices through the system anymore like we used to.
Well, that's my point. And I think that if people will eventually say, hey,
You think so?
I have a lawsuit, how come I can't have my lawsuit heard for 4 years, or my appeal heard for 4 years? Well, it's because you have a bunch of politicians who are playing a game, muddying up the whole system, and it's not efficient anymore. So they'll eventually care very much.
But people are going to start noticing, because these ties and these remands back to the district courts and this division in the circuits, which is what the Supreme Court is there to clear up, that's going to start affecting a lot of people. I mean, this has not happened in many, many, many years. So that is going to start affecting many people. It's going to start to get publicized. And it's ridiculous. President's elected for 4 years. He's got to do his job for 4 years.
I mean, listen, if I was, and I'm not, but if I was sitting in closed doors among, with Grassley and McConnell and the rest, if I start seeing around May that this carnival show is getting from bad to worse between Trump and Cruz and the rest, and I know my odds, and Hillary, puts a bow on it, that especially if there's nothing with the emails, there's no indictments or anything else, I may say to myself, I'm not going to do better than this guy.
You have to embrace this guy.
I mean, this
Absolutely.
guy, and I may get hurt in November if I'm seen as obstructionist and I won't even let this thing go to a hearing. To me, I think the dynamic may change, but I will say McConnell and Grassley have made it clear there will be no hearing. So if they go back on that, it's going to look like a major capitulation here. So I'm fascinated to see how this thing plays out. All right. Coming up next, the NFL versus the New York Times. The league now demanding not just an apology, but a retraction of the Times story about flaws in its concussion reporting. Now, we spoke with the reporter, and he's made it clear he stands by every word in his story. Our attorneys will weigh in. You'll also hear what that Times reporter had to say.